Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Smooth Jazz.
The Vertafore Insurance Podcast welcomes you back.
I'm in the mood.
Sounds of wonderful insurance, smooth jazz, and Brian Comerford.
The one and only.
I feel so honored.
Welcome to the VIP Podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode.
Oh, did you get the... I even faded that out. Did you hear that?
That was so good.
I'm ready to get you behind like a Stanton mixer. A couple of decks, you know.
Yes.
You already got the headphones.
It could happen. In a past life, I feel like I could have been a DJ.
It's never too
think
late.
You definitely could have been.
Right? Like, if I hadn't have gone down the insurance career, I think I could have been a DJ. I had my time.
Right.
I had my time on the DC streets.
All right, so are you going to do an official?
I should. It's just
Let the audience know
here's the
who
thing.
this guy is.
This is a special podcast because we have a podcast host on with podcast hosts.
So it better be
Who
good.
has a degree in podcast hosting?
Who has a degree? This is meta. This is Inception level podcasting.
Oh my goodness.
Leonardo
Yeah.
DiCaprio is right outside the door.
All right.
Or in
Wow.
our brains. We don't know.
Pressure's on. I better deliver.
Yeah, you got to.
So, Brian has a wealth of experience in the insurance industry. We met, I guess you could say met with air quotes because we met over LinkedIn when I was still with Be Atomic and had dropped a few podcasts that were opinionated about the insurance industry and technology providers.
And some of its top players, yeah.
Yeah. And he had reached out on LinkedIn and just was very supportive, and I appreciated that. We had a great conversation, and we've always kind of kept touching since. And then I came to Vertafore and realized I had obviously made the right decision because Brian was already here.
I love that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So
Right here.
yeah, so he was the senior VP of information technology at IMA. He's served on advisory councils and boards. He was behind the scenes at Ivans when they first really kicked things off when Reed was there, and obviously came back to Vertafore because he knows where the best of the best live. So we're really
Home is where the heart is.
Home is where the heart is. Yeah.
Well, my part here is done. Thanks, Sid.
You're welcome. Yeah, there we go. We'll have him back for beatboxing in 2025. Thanks, all.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today on the VIP Podcast.
Yeah, so trying to think. Right now, you are the director of solutions architect, which we were talking before is kind of a technical term. It sounds cool, like very cool.
Yes.
You put that on a business card, no one messes with you. But what does it actually mean is the question.
Yeah, that's like some Cobra Kai stuff right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as you alluded to in my background, being involved in advisory groups, co-chairing the CIO working group for years for the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, really I bring an advisory perspective that is hugely in need and beneficial to some of our largest clients. And so ultimately my role since returning to Vertafore has been squarely in that domain. I mean, really that's why Vertafore came knocking in the first place.
Yep.
Was not to bring me on board because they needed another salesperson. They needed another person who actually understood the challenges that agency principals were living in the trenches dealing with. And particularly when it came to all the pivot points required for that transition from old school legacy, very manual into more forward thinking digital, and really trying to have an understanding of what that means.
Okay, so you're sitting at the nexus of change, where
Yes.
the heartbreak and the tears
That's
and the
right.
blood
And
and
a lot
the
of finger
sweat
pointing.
and the Hail Marys all are happening.
Yes. Yeah. And hopefully some champagne at some point,
Well,
you know.
yes, obviously. That explains his calm demeanor, by the way, because you can't be in that moment of massive change and not have somebody guiding that process who is just super even keeled, which you are. Do you get angry? Like, I don't even see you as a guy who could get like mad.
I get wired on caffeine, and that can make me a little edgy sometimes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got a caffeine
Yeah.
edge.
Okay. I gotcha. So no Red Bulls for Brian. Got it.
I love it. All right. So let's rewind before Vertafore, though. And actually, even before insurance, you have had a wealth of experience watching technology companies go through transformation, reimagining, reinvention.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, how would you maybe talk a little bit about that experience, and then I'm curious where the parallels are between.
I love it. Thank you for that, Syd,
Yeah.
because, you know, I'm getting on in years, so it's always helpful for me to go backwards
all right.
before, you know, getting to current state.
I just had I just had my birthday like 2 days ago, so I'm old too. All right.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, 28 years old or something like that. So she's not old.
I still get carded twice at the bar. It's really frustrating.
There you go.
even
As,
though I
as,
don't
you,
drink.
as you should.
Yes.
You look youthful as ever.
They tell me at some point it's going to be a good thing, but I haven't hit that moment in time yet. So
Well, once that moment in time arrives, you'll wish that it was still going on.
that's fair.
Because I've surpassed that point, my friend. It was a lot more fun on the other side, believe me.
Fair enough.
So you mentioned that I'd spent a lot of time in technology companies, which is in part true, but I would characterize it more. I spent a lot of time on the cusp of industry types that were starting to go through some type of digital transformation.
Okay.
And
Got it.
You know, my undergraduate work was in radio, TV, and film, and all three of those things were going through some kind of transition in the early 90s when I was getting out of college.
Huge.
And so, you know, looking at, like, I worked a part-time job as a copy editor at a newspaper.
Yeah.
All of that was going through this huge transformation because suddenly the personal computer, which had been introduced in the decade previous, was bringing all of these desktop publishing capabilities, where newspapers now were changing the way that they were actually putting together all their publication materials.
Yep.
But they also had all this competition from independent startups that you know, had never existed before, but now had the tools, right? The power of the press belongs to the man who has a printer, right? So all of a sudden, all these people had that capability.
Yep.
And so that, you know, that was kind of one of those early indicators. Similarly, as I was working in TV production and film, you know, everything had been very much a photochemical process up to that point. It was slow, it was arduous, it was really expensive, a lot of equipment was involved, and time. And then all of a sudden, you start making this shift into avid digital production, where you could very quickly have a timeline of a video sequence and start cutting it up and doing your edits in something that was completely ephemeral, right? It wasn't even physical. It was just all on a screen. And that seemed really novel at the time. But part of what was happening for me along that path was I was starting to undergo an identification of this shift in mindset that was really, you know, sort of pivotal to how I landed in the insurance industry. And the one that I think was probably the most critical for me was the years that I spent in radio. And so I went from college to public to commercial to community radio. And right around that time that I arrived in community radio, the World Wide Web, which had only been around for a year at that point, enabled capability for being able to broadcast not using FM frequencies, but actually to have a digital stream that was served to individual computers. And initially, when I was at the community radio station, which I still produce at to this day, by the way,
That is awesome.
We were really inspired
That was
by
a flex, just in case anyone was wondering.
Yeah. Definition of flex. That was it.
Yep.
Well, I mean, you can check when I graduated on LinkedIn, so I'm not hiding my age here. But, we ended up, writing a grant
Yep.
to be able to get a server and a real audio producer license and actually have ISDN running into the station
Wow.
so that we were able to handle this digital streaming. And initially, the station was like, yeah, but we're a community station. So, I mean, we don't really care about serving out streams to people in other locales because that mindset had not yet arrived. There wasn't yet at transition point where there was a realization that, our audience is just this today, but it could be this. And for a station that's dependent on pledges in order to survive, it's a lot better to be getting checks from all of the other states that you're not residing in versus just yours, right? So it took some time before the whole webcasting thing ended up becoming sort of a basis of how the station wanted to operate versus, yeah, you can go do that for your little program and then just turn it off when you're done, right? Because we don't need that on 24 hours a day. So, all of that eventuated into me taking that concept and going commercial with it and really building something that was, an entrepreneurial labor of love as well,
Yes.
I mean, that's easy money, right?
Yep.
So a lot of hours spent, a lot of, tinkering with things and just a lot of challenges with trying to figure out how do I make this technological piece fit with this one and how does the data flow between those things? And now we're talking about bringing in third parties and, pre-iTunes, which really was the impetus to redefine the music industry. We were already sort of on that trajectory, right? We'd figured out Tower Records is the biggest distributor. We embedded our playlist into our player, so you could just click on something as you were listening to it and go and have order fulfillment directly from that, right? As we had listeners sitting at their cubicles listening to our program. So all of that was revolutionary. But it was also happening at a time where the music industry was saying, we've got time on our side. In fact, in 1998, I remember at the annual conference of the Record Industry Association of America, they brought out their report, and their findings were that digital distribution of music was 5 years off, and that they were going to figure out how to monetize it before anyone in the industry needed to worry about what that even meant.
This is a cautionary tale.
This is a cautionary tale, and this is why I bring it up, because you mentioned the parallels, and I think this is a perfect example of it. So it's not like there were, a bunch of scrappy little startups thinking, hey, my goal is to go upend this industry. It was people like myself who were curious, and they were intrigued by capabilities that had emerged, and next thing you know, they're building something that sent the record industry into a panic, because once the MP3 codec was cracked, the toothpaste was out of the tube, right? I mean, Napster arrived on the scene a year after that, and now the music industry was playing catch up, trying to figure out, wait, how do we contain this? And they couldn't figure it out, to be honest. It was really iTunes that came along and figured out this is how we're going to reinvent distribution in the music industry, and that's been true now ever since those days.
So what, and I feel like there's a micro parallel and a macro parallel. We could talk about the detailed parallel, the micro parallel around, well, how does distribution, meaning the agency force, the independent model specifically change, and who's going to be that player that comes on and just completely disrupts the way things are working today. I think there's also a macro parallel where there's some principles that are happening there. How do you want to attack this? Like, it seems like there's lessons to be learned between what you experienced and what's going on in the industry today.
Maybe I'll give you an abbreviated version of what I think on more of the micro, because I think we're sort of at the other end now of having seen just the gold rush into this industry from outside investment money, particularly placing their bets on lots of scrappy little startups, which has been great. It's been really exciting to see all the innovation that's come into the industry. But I think there's also been a component of it where, just like boom dot bust with the dot-com craze in the 1990s, there's a lot of vaporware out there. And maybe not even as much vaporware as a fundamental misunderstanding of the complexities of the nature of this industry. And anyone who's outside of it, you know, we're all forced to have a transactional relationship with insurance because of the nature of personal lines. But that's a very simplistic view into what the entire industry serves, and especially as you go further up the complexity of risk, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're at a point where I've seen a lot of this settling in terms of new market entrants who, you know, had really kind of created a lot of concern around the disruption of external forces into the industry, into more of there's kind of a collaborative mindset that I think has been emerging that is really pretty cool. I think it's well reflected in our Orange Partner program, but that's kind of an aside. But, you know, I think that there's been just a lot of change that has sort of been predicted and hasn't been necessarily fulfilled in the way that even 18 months ago, I think, you know, a lot were foretelling was going to be the future of the industry.
Yeah, I think we expected that there's, you know, the agency management system, which plays a different role today than it used to. It used to be the end-all be-all. I think we expected that to be extremely disrupted, almost like killed at some point, right? And what I think we're seeing more of now is the agency management system functionality and core components still exist, but don't exist as the agency management system today, right? You have like Vertafore and Apply that are trying to essentially platform and, you know, unify those components with other functionality that an agency needs, like a rater and CRM and that kind of, you know, just automation. And then you see other companies, like we were talking to somebody from Canopy Connect the other day who is starting to bring some of that, you know, policy storage or even policy servicing into Canopy Connect, right? So you're seeing this sort of like the agents, it's just an interesting world, and it'll be interesting to see it is being disrupted. It's just like almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts as opposed to, you know, one swift, would you say Cobra Kai?
Yeah. So my question would be, like, if my brain's working the same way, because y'all are way smarter than me, but I've been in this 22 years now, and for me, for 15 of those years, we crept along with technology, and we were always behind every other segment in the industry and in the world, for that matter, it felt like. And then all of a sudden, and I think, you know, obviously I think I know what it was, but, you know, the last 4 or 5 years, we went from crawling to sprinting, I feel like. And obviously we had a worldwide pandemic that helped some of that, I feel like. But was there some other things, in your opinion, that helped some of that? And do you feel like we need to go from a sprint back to a jog or somewhere in the middle? Or do you think we're going to continue to sprint until we just, you know, run our legs off? I don't know what we're going to do there. I don't know where the analogy is. Y'all are the runners. But I don't know. I just feel like we are running so fast right now as opposed to where we were 7 or 8, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think the first thing that I would attribute it to, Heath, is what you heard me allude to earlier in terms of mindset. I think it's taken quite a bit of time for the industry as a whole, right? And we're talking about primarily industry leadership, to catch up with the idea that there is a necessary change that has to take place in order to remain competitive. I think for a long time, when I entered into the industry 20 years ago myself, being a technologist who was like a design and development guy,
you were crying a little bit.
Well, I think my peers struggled to understand how anyone who had anything to do with technology was something other than IT support.
Yeah.
Because that was the custodial mindset of what technology did.
Yeah.
It's we run the business.
Hardware focused almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very processing oriented.
Yeah.
It's this broke. Someone like you needs to come along and fix it.
Right.
It wasn't we are a data and technology company that just happens to sell insurance, and that needs to be sort of the guiding principle that drives how we operate the business.
Yep.
I believe that mindset has now started to really take place. I mean, you see it in a lot of these different, broker-led consortiums that are in the space now, where there's a lot of collaboration that's taking place by the people who actually do the work because they realize there is a competitive new market entry point that may look different from what a Vertafore or an Applied, or a Xywave are providing to the marketplace. And that may be more of that entrepreneurial approach where now the tools start to look different because they're being shaped by the people who have to use them on a day-to-day basis.
Yes. Yeah, talk to me a little bit about, and I think this goes to the root of why you came back to Vertafore, which is just, it's always so interesting to see. I mean, I look at my own career, like how people move through the industry, whether they stay in the industry, where they go in the industry. Why'd you come back? Why Vertafore?
Yeah, well, no, that's a great question. And I would start by saying it's our leadership. I think that, 15 years of sitting on the in the buyer's seat on the client side, I saw a lot of permutations of leadership at Vertafore. I saw a lot of different philosophies in terms of how capabilities were being delivered, and suffered a lot of frustration. Was very vocal about that. Had a seat at the table, with things like the Sajida Roundtable, and where thankfully I was able to voice a lot of the concerns coming directly from the agency and have those things at times translated into new features that actually created improvements, or in times wholesale products like InsureLink, right? Bringing along entirely new capabilities that didn't exist. But part of what I also saw was with the arrival of Amy Zupon and James Tom in particular, there was a very fresh perspective that, Amy in particular, I think, coming from outside of the industry, but still being a product person and a technology person and an entrepreneur, the first thing she had to do was understand what's this business about. The second thing she needed to do is figure out, why do we have all this legacy, backlog of stuff, and how do we start to transform that? And so it's taken some years to get to that point where that transition could be possible. And I think to her credit, she took time to hit pause for the organization and said, we got to figure out some things here. Like, our products are all disconnected. They don't talk to each other. We've got data stored in different ways. We've got, we're lacking a unified code base for our applications. All of those things need to be corrected in order for us to function like a modern suite of tools. And so we're going to take some time and stop chasing after feature releases and make sure that we're actually doubling down on fixing the internal framework for how we deliver.
Yep.
That will help supercharge our future for rapid application development going forward. And that takes like real leadership chutzpah in my perspective.
Yep.
So when I left Vertafore and actually went over to the blue side for a while, I was still suffering a lot of the frustration of what that meant, because it meant that there was a lot of slowing down at a time where we had to go faster in order to remain competitive. But as you well know from being in a software development entrepreneurial background yourself,
cannot move slowly.
And so, consequently, I think during that time away, I was working more on the carrier side. That broadened my perspective on, kind of what are the demands and the challenges and where are the capabilities that are emerging. How is that ultimately going to affect downstream and distribution with the agencies? But also that gave time for Vertafore, I think, to get on the other side of catching up with where philosophically I felt like it should be. Not that I'm making the decisions around here in any capacity, but I was certainly informed with how our clients felt about that experience. And so coming back and being able to be in an advisory role with those clients and also having a conduit to be able to share that directly with our senior leadership, all of those things I think felt like it really it came together at the right time.
Yeah, you really are sitting at the nexus of a lot of different things. I'd love to pivot just a little bit. Heath, did you want to follow up on anything before I take us on a left-hand turn here?
Are we jogging?
Say what?
Are we jogging? Is
this I think okay? We're good. I think you answered that well. I just want to say, as most of you guys know listening, I'm still somewhat new to Vertafore, and to his credit, to his point, one of the things that I've figured out since being here is that if you're listening to this right now and you have this idea, this thought process that Vertafore is this ivory tower company that doesn't care what's going on in the streets, that's totally false. And I figured that out being here the last almost year now, to know that, there are people like Amy Zupon and James Tom and, Brian Comerford and Sydney Rowe, people that care about what you're doing in your agency. And we want to see that connectivity. We want to see you thrive as an agency. And that's been probably the biggest breath of fresh air for me being here, because I was probably one of those, just like you listening, if you're out there thinking these technology companies don't care, they just want to make money. That is so not true. And, you mentioned SCO earlier, several months back, we got to go to that event and see these salespeople and these technology and the marketing people come together, and man, they get fired up and they really do care and get just, as the kids said, they get lit about the things that are going on and how they can improve their customer experience. So I will just echo what you just said. And if you're listening, I can promise you that, what he's saying is so legit and so true.
I feel like we need some dubstep wub 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 thrown in,
right?
When he says lit, just kind of help reinforce the street cred that he brought,
or the air horn. But anyway,
one day we could have an air horn in the podcast studio. It could happen,
dude.
Don't tease.
Right. So now you can take the pivot to the direction.
Right.
I just wanted to bring it down to a serious level and just say I couldn't agree with you more on that. And that's been such an amazing thing for me to see coming into this company.
That's cool. I love hearing you say that.
Yeah, agreed. So let's get tactical for those agents who are looking for that actionable takeaway from the podcast. Let's talk about data.
I love this. I'm excited. Let's go.
Oh, yeah.
Bow.
So you are a connoisseur of data. I mean, we've had so many different conversations about data strategy, best practices, management, where data is going in the industry and how to think about it, how it's impacting the agency and other areas of the industry. You're sitting at this sort of interesting nexus that we keep talking about, right? With change management, where you're changing systems. And
was that your word of the day on the calendar, nexus?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be my word of the day.
You guys should give a bingo card away with each episode.
Oh my gosh.
That would be
Brian
amazing.
with the ideas.
Dude.
I love that. That's great.
We both just got replaced by Brian Comerford for the VIP podcast host. Dang it. See ya. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. So, as I was saying, the nexus. Do you want me to
for
say
those
it
of
one
you
more
listening,
time?
I'm going to give a little bit more. It is my time 4:30. Sid's time 5:30. It's end of the day. We're having a blast. This is awesome.
I'm stringing along to keep Heath on board as long as I can at this point.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so data and change management. That's what I want to talk about, right? Because it's so interesting. People don't really think about their data until they have to move it. And as soon as they move it, it
Sure.
all becomes very clear,
Yeah.
the issues, the challenges, why they should have paid attention to it before. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in your role, right? From a data standpoint, from this change management standpoint, like, what are you seeing? Give us an inside peek.
Sure. So I'll give you a couple different answers to that. First, I'll start with, you hear the phrase, data isn't a destination, it's a journey, right? You hear that a lot. And I guess it sounds, comforting to some degree. But, where are you on that path, I think, is the first question that you have to be cognizant of. And, so if you think of it as a maturity curve, right, like a series of steps, where is your agency and how much time have you spent thinking about the importance of it? Because
Like a crawl, walk, run maturity curve.
yeah, and exactly.
Simplified.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
way more complicated in Brian's mind, but I just tried to bring it down to.
No, that's well, we talked about
Arkansas.
having to bring stuff down into bar
Yep.
terminology. So, I want you to think again about, like,
I love it.
if that was a drink recipe, where would we
Where would be?
where
Well, I
we
would be
in
getting
that?
ID'd again. So
So yes. So when I think about, this industry has really come from this transactional sort of order taker kind of role in many ways, to the consumer demand, and I'm not just talking about 15 minutes can save you 15% or less. I'm talking about organizations that have a lot of complex risk factors and really require consultative expertise in order to make the right decisions about what they're doing with their business. And so, on that maturity curve, how much time have you spent really getting beyond something like just looking in the rearview mirror with your data to see what's happened, right? How much are you going out onto that next step to start to identify some predictive factors, right? That may be as simple as how you work with CRM. Right, identifying where cross-sell opportunities are. It may be some benchmarking so that you can see, where do your peers stack up in terms of what you're doing, and how are they chasing after some of your current clients that you want to retain,
Yes.
and what are the factors that identify where that churn risk might be. So, now you're getting into that next
and these
level.
are conversations that agencies are having with you, and they are wanting these capabilities.
I think that there's two pieces to it, Syd.
Okay.
I think the first is agencies know they should be having those conversations, and that's kind of the first conversation that takes place is the question, where is square one? Right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
then the second, especially with our largest clients, they've been thinking about this for quite a while, and they may have developed entire internal practice areas around these capabilities. And so that spread on the maturity curve looks pretty significant, right? When you start thinking about where are some of these largest enterprises in our industry versus some of those who are on the cusp of, being a small, large business to, being a large, small business, right? Or maybe it's the other way around.
Who knows? Tomato.
But yeah, to that point though, you bring up a good point that, those our listeners as well as our customers range from startup agency to enterprise, large, nationally traded or publicly traded agencies. And so you're having to, navigate those waters as well in your department, correct?
Absolutely. And for me, a lot of it starts with strategy. And that's not necessarily saying that you have to sit down and have a full-blown strategic plan. You should have one of those at a certain point, and something that you can easily socialize within your organization. But you should at least have an identification of, where do I believe we're starting? What do I think the next step is? And how far do we want to go? And along, that path, there's some opportunities where we can find people to hire and bring inside and do some of that work for us, or do all of the work, or we can buy some tools that help us actually leverage what's inside our systems today and expose some of that so that now we've got some data-driven decision-making potential without having to hire a bunch of data scientists or project managers or consulting firms, right? And so that's kind of the next phase, I think. And all of that is based on what's the amount of time that you're spending on really identifying those strategic imperatives for your organization. So some organizations have gotten really large and have never spent any time thinking about that, believe it or not. And now they're at a point where they've grown so large that they can't even cobble together insights into their current book of business without spending 3 months just putting together reports. And that's incredibly cumbersome, and think about how much volatility that introduces to the executive decision making that you've got in your business if you're not even really sure how you performed in the last quarter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so let's say, it's not possible to have you talk to every single agency one-on-one and help them through this.
Well, hopefully I'm doing
scale.
a little bit of that right now.
Well, yes, exactly. So where would you say that someone should start if they're trying to become more self-aware around their own data maturity and improve their data quality?
You stole my question.
Oh, well,
that's a good question, Heath. Let me answer that for you.
Man. You missed the nexus.
I know. You're great minds think alike. Great question.
Yeah. So again, I think the first thing is the self-awareness. Like where would I rank myself? And I'll give you a perfect example.
But what if they're like, it's that old saying, like, it's hard to explain to someone who lives in the desert what grass is.
Right.
And so it's how do you become self-aware when you're not self-aware?
Right.
How, if they don't know what that maturity scale really looks
like. They
like.
don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a real world example that
Okay.
maybe will help a little bit. So, early in my career in insurance, I was working on building CRM automations and had Syd in our agency. And I was trying to look between the two record sets to identify all of the different contact records that belonged to producers versus all of the contact records that were, primary contacts for the servicers, because all of that looked a little bit different. Sometimes there was some overlap. And so I just authored a little routine to generate an exception report. And I would go through record by record and grab this company and all of its associated policies and all of its contacts, and then go over to the CRM system and see what the producer had and pull those two things together and compare them. And part of what I started to realize was, well, wait a second, there's like we've got gaps in the data all over the place. And I went to one of our operational leads and explained this to her, and she said, "Oh no, we don't have any data problems in Syd. We rule that with an iron fist." And I said, well, let's take a look at this exceptions report. There's 27,000 exceptions here. So here's an easy way that we can validate that. Let's just go to the first record in the list and open up the system and see what we've got. And sure enough, record after record, what we identified was people had fat-fingered a zip code. And at that time, there was no
it's a thing, man.
business logic.
You can't bring that down any further. That was perfect. Bottom shelf, fat thumbed it. I love that.
Or, people tend to get creative when they're trying to move quickly through a system and could discover that actually hitting the space bar and creating a blank character in a field resulted in creating a valid character as far as the system was concerned, even though it then resulted in the downstream impact of when executives were trying to run reports, looking at things where there are a bunch of gaps in the data and not even being able to know, like, why is this here? There's something wrong with the system. Well, in that case, there was something wrong with the system. The business logic didn't enforce rules that would prevent that kind of thing from happening, but it was the creativity of people trying to work fast who had the mentality that I've got to get this done. I got to get it done by 5 o'clock. We got to bind this, and I'll get back to it. but getting back to it rarely comes. And so you perpetuate that over years, and eventually what you have is just this mashup of a bunch of junky data. And so, garbage in, garbage out, right? That's the old saying.
Yep.
And it's really true. You may have a lot of valid data in your record set. You also may have a lot of invalid data. And until you spend some time going through the process of cleansing it, and there are some automated tools that can help you do that, and certainly those are things that we can help with as well. But it starts with people, right? And so if it's fingers on the keyboard that you're worried about because they're not following the rules, then to your change management point, why aren't they following the rules? It's not because they want to screw things up for the organization. It's because they're in a time crunch and they're trying to plow around the stump. And ultimately they don't understand the impact of the detriment to the value, right? Or the devaluation that is being caused as a result of not being careful.
Right. So, but how do you solve for that, right? Like, how do you? What's a tangible takeaway, a tangible action item that someone could, use? Is it just identifying the issue and then, hey, we've got to go to a specialist or an expert for this, or what's their next step?
It's kind of like, I think, when you run into a problem in your relationship with your significant other, right? It's first you've both got to agree, right, that there's something
admitting
wrong.
that there's a problem.
That's right.
Yes.
And then you need to seek help, and how you do that is the next step. So, in terms of change management, you brought that term up, and for me, really what that means is if you're going to do it well, then you need to shape the path towards the change that you want to see occur. And the best way of doing that is to be incredibly clear around the messaging of what the value is for that change. And so, when technology or a new process gets implemented into an organization, typically it's just sort of like, there we go, finish that. But no, that's actually, while that's not always easy, I would argue that that's the easiest part, right? Because now it's the difficulty of hunkering down and getting people to adopt those changes. And, muscle memory is a tricky thing. I mean, people aren't going to change their ways unless there's really a compelling reason to do it. So training is certainly a component of that, but that's not enough, because that's typically here's your 3 days of training on your new process or in your new system or whatever it is, and then it's go get to work on it. So it's understanding the value.
Do you put in, to your point, pre-conversion homework, or training of like, here's our steps and our processes that we're going to do to clean up this data? Instead of using this abbreviation, we'll use this. Instead of this language, we use that. Instead of this space bar, we do this. Is that kind of the things you're getting at there for those listening? Because a lot of times what I hear is the word conversion just scares the living out of people. And they're like, I don't want to do it. I'm just going to stay on this antiquated system as long as I can, because I do not want to go through this change.
Right. Yeah.
So is that kind of what you're getting at right there?
Yeah. And again, I'll just keep going back to the idea of, messaging the value. And so different people learn in different ways. And so, having a slogan is certainly one thing that you can do to help reinforce what that message is. Sometimes it's as simple as just actually portraying it through some pictures, right? Here's the spaghetti mess that is our current set of systems and how disconnected all of them are. And here's the pristine, field of dreams that we would like to get to, where all the data flows in. We've got all these rules in place that are going to check to ensure that, behavior has been reinforced with what we're actually putting into the systems. And so, having sort of a multitude of ways to reinforce it, but having that on repeat, right? So that you bring the organization together and you explain, hey, we've got a brand new strategy. And the name of our strategy is, ABC strategy. You actually give it a name, right? There's a reason that Apple names all of its software systems, this one's Tiger, right? there's a reason that there's an identity that goes along with that, because then it gives you something easy to point to and say, well, remember when we were talking about that was at this stage,
Yep.
right? And then here's
Yep.
this other thing over here. But that's the beginning of being able to say, we figured out there's these 3 things to do, right? And rule of 3 is always a good way to go.
Yep.
In our strategy, it's these 3 things, and we've got to do these underlying objectives in order to accomplish these imperatives.
Yeah.
And then you publish it, you socialize it. You don't socialize it once, you socialize it multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
You invite people to lunch and learns.
Mm-hmm.
You reward them,
Mm-hmm.
for following along and
Yep.
their good behavior and helping to be good stewards of those principles that you've put out there for the organization. And then you really start to see change happen. And not only that, you can have a team meeting and, call on Heath and say, now, Heath, what are those 3 things that are important pillars
Yep.
for our strategy? And,
Yeah.
he's going to name them. And
Yep.
I love that.
not only is he going to get a gold star for the day, but, maybe the agency president is going to take Heath out for lunch.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. So, what would be a, I guess I've asked, sort of starting point, I guess that self-awareness is the starting point essentially, right?
I think so.
Is really
Yeah,
understanding.
it's a good way to characterize it.
Yeah, really understanding like where you sit from a data maturity standpoint, and being honest with yourself about it. Making sure that you're not sugarcoating anything.
And I think part of that honesty has, comes to terms with the fact that, if you want X, then you're going to have to do Y.
Yeah.
And so back to that phrase that, data is a journey, right? Not a destination.
Yep.
Well, okay, so what's that going to take? Because we're probably not going to be at the same level of spend that we've been in years prior if we're going to make some significant transformational changes. So having the right mindset about what's it going to take from a resource perspective, and that's people, that may be new people that aren't on the team today. That's the time of people who are already underwater with some of what they're having to do, because they're going to have to contribute some of their expertise to this.
Right,
And then that's also, we're going to have to spend some additional money. And there may be some new technology involved, and there may be some changes in processes, and there may be some outside advisors who are required to come in and help shepherd this along, because we really don't have the right people here to do that. We got great people for doing our insurance business, but we don't necessarily have great people for leading change management or helping us understand how to set strategy or understanding the underlying mechanics of our systems so that we can turn the corner on that digital transformation.
And I wanna just point out really quickly that for those listening, Brian is, I don't want to say in the weeds is the wrong phrase, but you're getting your hands dirty in a lot of ways, like talking to these agencies, helping them. Obviously, you have that strategic view and you're connected to leadership and making sure they know what's going on, but you're also working at the grassroots. And so what you're hearing at that level, like, I guess what I'm saying is, for those listening, you're not alone, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're struggling with these questions, if you're wondering, like, where do I start? Don't give up on doing the work, because everybody is wrestling with the same things right now. Data is a huge, figure out how to centralize your data, how to truly weaponize it, how to make sure it's secure in a world with AI and ChatGPT now. I mean, this is the forefront of, a lot of what's happening with InsurTech right now. So I appreciate you coming on and giving us a little, I feel like we probably just scratched the surface on what and what's inside of, your brain as far as, what's happening out in the industry.
I'm a fountain of useless information, as my wife likes to tell me on occasion.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe to her, but to everybody in the insurance industry, we're all nodding our heads like, yes, yes.
Good.
So,
yeah, I feel like if we had Vertafore Radio, you could be a weekly segment that we just get into.
okay,
with.
see, you have to be careful with Heath because he will get you wrapped. See, we're on record right now.
Oh, dear.
We're being
Right.
recorded. So
That's
if you
true.
if you start nodding your head and say yes, he's gonna call you and be like, "Listen, Brian, I know you were nodding your head."
Heath, maybe
Right.
weekly is too much, okay?
Okay,
But I'm
can-
willing to
yeah.
come back.
we should.
No, but
anyway.
I love that idea, man. That's good. Good stuff.
There's a lot that we could get from this guy.
Yeah.
And those that are listening, if anybody wanted to follow up with you or someone on your team or anything like that, could they do that, and how?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly I'm on LinkedIn. So if you're not, already, if you don't have my direct contact at Vertafore, then that's an easy way to get in touch with me. No one at Vertafore is hard to find. If you're, if you want to talk to us and you're trying to track us down, you're going to be able to get to us directly here. But really, I think just opening the door and making a request to have a conversation, whether an existing client, whether intrigued about what we're doing here and wanting to learn more, we've got a variety of ways to make that connection, and
Awesome.
certainly my time is yours.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back on in a couple months just to hear how things are going and what new insights have bubbled up to the surface in this
I love it.
very rapidly changing part of the industry. So with that, Heath, I feel like we got to close this thing out. I always tell people to go to YouTube, go to Channel Orange. If they haven't hit the subscribe button, smack it, do it. You know you want to. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Pop it, hit it, smash it.
And I'll just say, one of the things I love about this podcast is
Yeah.
if I've got a day where I got to churn out a PowerPoint presentation or, work on something that is, relatively mundane enough that I can keep one ear open. I love to just have this podcast running in the background. You guys have
send
so
his
many.
commission check in the mail.
You have a great
So from
variety
time
of
to time, I'm
guests.
just gonna be like, "What's up, Brian?" And just so when you're listening with that one ear,
Shout out.
you're like, "Yeah, shout out to Brian and those one ear listeners."
I'm going to
love
be
it.
waiting for Heath to cue the wub 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 on the
That's right.
the dubstep soundtrack. As soon as I hear that, it'll be like like my cowbell.
I'm bringing in.
Love it.
I'm bringing in the air horn.
Please do, dude. That would be awesome. All right, guys. With
Brilliant.
that, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.